Hello and welcome back to another episode of On the Beaten Track. I'm your host, Rihanna. Thank you so much for all the feedback coming through for the last 2 episodes, especially on TikTok, where there's been a lot of responses about the shorts that I've put out there. If you feel like following it through to the YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate the watch. I have been getting some feedback on the YouTube channel on the first episode I did. Some feeling that I didn't dig deep enough into the indigenous root and really spoke about it from more of a colonial perspective, and then the way I spoke about the guys from West and East Africa. And I just wanted to address those two. Firstly, as I said in my commentary back to both of them, I am telling the story as I have read up on it. I always look for more than one source on something. I am a lot of the time finding it hard to find sources for these time periods, so there might be holes. I am telling it to you of the interesting and exciting things that I've found, because a lot of those things have been forgotten with time. I'm happy to take feedback and really engage on what might be missing from the episodes. I found it really interesting. I found it frustrating at times, but it has been so rewarding finding some of these things out. So please continue to do that. Apologies for the lighting weirdness today. My husband and my kids bought me blinds for my recording room so that I could record any time of the day. Weirdly, one of the blinds caught fire this weekend. So such oddity, and this is where we find ourselves, unfortunately. So let's hope for the best. I'm not always able to do the recordings at night because of the kids, but bear with me while we try and sort out that issue. Okay, today I'm talking about 3 very significant women to South Africa legacy and cultural tapestry. All 3 were slaves who came to the Cape in varying circumstances, similar in some ways, and we'll look at where they came from, what happened once they came to the Cape, and how they became stammoeders. This was the first time I actually heard this term. Going into this episode, it was only supposed to be about Angela van Bengali. And then when I picked at that, I found this person. When I picked at that, I found this person. And then it just became this like lots of people to kind of look at and coherently put the story together. And the varying accounts and contradictory accounts, which some of I'll go into. So I've tried to stay to the SouthAfricanHistory.org and the Cape Town Museum's retelling of these ladies' lives. And I've picked 3 out of them. I'll mention another one, but just fair mention. And hopefully it's a coherent story that I'll share why they were so interesting to me. But coming back to stammoeder or stamouers, we're talking about stem like the root, moeder, mother, ouer, parent, father. And stamouers or progenitors are individuals considered to be the founding person of a specific surname to be found in South Africa. I'd actually never heard the term before, so this was all news to me. Surnames have changed over time because depending on the literacy of the individual who for the first time wrote it down in a South African document or a record. The number of South Africans who have stamouers who were slaves or dependents of or are far more than what one would expect. Those who claim stamouers would be far greater amongst coloureds and white people in South Africa. Found that very interesting. So there's a article which I'll link below called Let Them Speak Slave Stamouers that is on the southafricanhistory.org site. And I will be doing a importing of slave, when people came in, on the next episode. But unlike many other slave societies whose slaves were homogenous, the Cape had a real cosmopolitan slave population. Feels so weird to say cosmopolitan and slave population in the same sentence, right? The Cape was like the Tower of Babel, and if you know it from either the Bible or from movies, whichever way works for you, with diverse nationalities and languages. Slave places of origin can be put down to certain areas like Africa, Mozambique, Indian subcontinent, and Indonesia, which I found also there's a lot of roots in Southeast Asia. Today we'll be looking at the lives and impact of Catharina van Bengali. I know there's two of them, so stick with me, which made it really confusing. Then Angela van Bengali and Anna de Kooning. So Catharina and Angela, and they have other names. So there's Groot Catering and my Angela or Ancilla, or so there is multiple names when you speak or find them. They were brought to the Cape from a large slave market in Batavia, which was in modern-day Jakarta in Indonesia. They were not related, even though they had the same surname. So how does that happen? Today you might go, no, the same surname. But you find as you start looking at this, there's a lot of Van Bengali. For the Dutch who controlled that slave market, they used to give people surnames that indicated where they were from. So you would be Van Batavia, you could be Van Japan, so from being the fun. That's where it comes that they have the same surname, and they did arrive similar times in the Cape. And then some of them were just incorrect. Like someone like Anna van Bengali, who I was mixing up her and Angela, was not from the Indian region, but actually when you looked at her DNA, she was from the Golden Region triangle where Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos converge on the Mekong. And she was from there, but they just said Van Bengali. Even they did it wrong. This Batavia was a heavily enslaved city in the 17th and 18th century, with a tight policing on segregation of origin, designated to prevent uprising. Where have I heard that before? The VOC promoted divisions amongst enslaved groups. VOC slaves and privately owned slaves would arrive continually in Batavia. It really it worked as a regional hub that redistributed enslaved people to other posts or to households in the city. The VOC fleets from Ceylon and Batavia routinely stopped at the Cape, and official crews conducted private slave sales within VOC rules. People would be taken from different areas and brought to this place and then redistributed to where they were required, assuming. Catharina or Groot Catering, they had a solid birth year for her, which is really odd during this time. So it was 1631. She was born in Pilkat, India. She was enslaved and likely brought to Batavia, where she was a slave to a free woman called Maria Magdalena. What a name. She was sexually assaulted by her lover, the slave, Klaus van Malabar. Oh my God, there's a Malabar in PE. When I saw this, I was laughing. And in the altercation, she hit him with a ladder across his stomach, and he died 4 days later since his bladder had burst. He FA'd and FO'd. She then was charged with murder and received a death sentence. She was, however, pardoned, being banished as a slave to the Cape. She arrived in the Cape in 1657. She was the first recorded female slave convict in the Cape. There was a lot of firsts with the Gritoa, and there's a lot of firsts with these ladies too, which you really understand why they became the stammoeders. Okay. Angela was captured in the Ganges Delta of the province known as West Bengal in India today. The enslaved were captured from the fringes of settled areas from amongst tribal groups and mountain people who were not rooted in India or Muslim societies. So they were the guys that lived in the mountains, on farms. They weren't in the bigger cities. They were taken to slaving stations in Ceylon or Myanmar and sold. Angela was taken from Bengal and then sold at Batavia. From there, she was brought to the Cape of Good Hope via Mauritius, which was a compulsory stop. Angela had been brought to the Cape with her companion Domingo and 3 children by the commander of the return ship, Peter Kemp. The VOC commander, Peter Kemp, brought Angela and her family with him to the Cape as personal servants for him, and they arrived in the Cape in 1657. There's much controversy around this Domingo character, but there's very little documentation, with some saying that he was Angela's husband and the father to her children, and then some saying that Domingo was a woman, but I really couldn't find anything else. Then Anna de Koning is actually Angela's daughter. So the most accurate account says that she came with her mom and arrived here at the Cape. And some says she's a product of a relationship between her mom and the company official from Ghent, Francois de Koning, which speaks to a surname. I'm sticking to the account that she arrived with her mom because that's what the Cape Town Museum website and SA History Museum's website says. And I didn't want to talk through this alternative because I couldn't really find any concrete evidence to it. So if anybody has anything that could kind of speak to that, then let me know. So Jan van Riebeeck came to the Cape in 1652. He then started petitioning the VOC to allow him to bring slaves into the Cape, as they do. Let's talk about their life in the Cape. Catharina, I hope I'm saying it right. So she arrived in the Cape in 1657. She worked as a washerwoman at the Fort de Goede Hoop for Jan van Riebeeck. At the time, there were only about 14 women, whether freed or enslaved, living in the small settlement where there were 90 European men. In these early years, she mothered 4 children. I could only really find 2. There was Peter Everards, a high-ranking company official with whom she had a daughter named Petronella. It's a very popular name back in the day, hey? Then Hans Christoffel Snyman, spelled very weirdly, a soldier with whom she had a son, Christoffel Snyman. He later became the founding ancestor of the Snyman family in South Africa. So if I put the name Snyman, I'm just pronouncing, so you see the different writing, but I'm just pronouncing it that way. So she was baptized alongside her friend Moy Ancela, which is Angela. They officially recognized her as a Christian and marked her integration into colonial religious life. These women did it for protection, right? Then she formally married Anthony, which I couldn't say the name last week, Jans de Later van Bengali, a free black, in a letter dated January 1672, confirmed that she was fully pardoned and granted freedom. So this allowed her to get married and further solidified her legal and social status. Again, you marry, taking on Christianity, all levels of protection that these ladies had. Tragically, Catharina and her husband, their daughter Petronella, and granddaughter Petronella also, all died between December 1682 and February 1683, likely due to a plague outbreak. Her son, Christoffel Snyman, remember, survived and inherited his stepfather's estate. So Anthony, as a free black man, owned a lot of property. And then he inherited that from his stepdad, and that was his future and allowed him to be educated and allowed him to have a lineage. What I found was that he became the owner of Zandvliet Farm, now Delta. Amazing. I found that really, really interesting. To go into a bit of who he married, but he married into a eminent French Huguenot family. Then Angela, she came in and she worked for Jan van Riebeck. Then when he left, he made a lot of money selling his slaves, including Angela. So Angela was sold to Fiscal Abraham Gabim. At some stage, they speak about him as Secunda Gabima. During this time with him, she had 2 children by another official, Jan van Assen from Brussels, with whom she bore 2 children, Johannes and Jacobus. Very popular names again, still today. And when he, Secunda, left the Cape for Batavia in 1666, he came to an arrangement with his friend Thomas Christoffel Muller, a baker, for Angela to be manumitted after doing an apprenticeship. So manumitted is to be free. Now, just to be clear, to be a free slave is free, right? You're not owned by anybody. What she then came on to do was just extraordinary, but you had to get permission to get married. You had to get permission if you wanted to leave and go back to your country. So you were free within rules. So she was officially freed in 1666, making her the earliest recorded manumitted freed slaves at the Cape. She then petitioned the VOC for a piece of land while she was working for Muller and was awarded a deed of a plot measuring 57 by 50 squares in Herenstraat, which is the current day Strand Street. There she built a small house and started a vegetable garden, and she marketed her crops. A freed slave who then petitioned the VOC for property, got it, then started growing vegetables and selling it. She then went on to marry a German settler, Arnaldus Willemse Basson, and she gave birth to several children. Okay, so there's multiple accounts about this. I could find, okay, they had 3 children, then it was like they had 7. It is very confusing. These 7 children then included her previous kids. I couldn't really get a proper read on that. So if anybody has more information, please let me know. But these children would bear the names Basson and Van As, which would become founding families in the emerging mixed-race community in the Cape. They were the founders of the first successful fishing business in the Cape, operating from Table Bay to Saldanha Bay. Amazing. In 1689, Son, who was way older than Angela, died. He left his widow with a large inheritance of 6,495 guilders, which equivalent would be 117,000 rand today, if I got the correct conversion, and a lot of land on Herengraag, which is the present day Adley Street. Angela became the owner of this land. Widow, loan, land, fishing, doing the things. She died in 1720, leaving an estate, considerable property, 15,000 guilders in cash, as well as property in Hout Bay and Drakenstein. Anna de Kooning was likely born in Batavia. Like I said, there is some conflicting backstory with her. She came with her mom to the Cape and was freed alongside her mother in 1666. Anna married a Swedish-born VOC official, Olaf Berg. Yes, Olaf, like from, yes. 1687, Berg was accused of embezzlement. I think they went to send him out to some Portuguese ship and he took some of the stuff and pocketed it. Eventually he was caught, sent to Robben Island. He did plead guilty to stealing stuff which they found in his house. He was given the opportunity, either he can keep his rank, but then he needs to leave and he needs to serve the company outside of the Cape in Ceylon, or he can lose his rank and become a free burgher and live in the Cape. He decided to keep his rank, and then this is where the variation of story comes from, is that some said Anna left with him, while others said she stayed and looked after their properties, etc. So the one that I'm sticking to is that she left. Then they returned to the Cape from Ceylon. In Ceylon, he built a record of service that was fine, that he was appointed captain of the garrison. When they returned, they moved into this massive residence in Herengracht Street near the Dutch Reformed Church. In 1712, now this is a gap. I'm not really sure what this gap is, but then all of a sudden just speaks about Simon van der Staal. Okay, so Simon van der Staal dies in 1712. With his death came the division of his great and beautiful farm, Groot Constantia, which was divided into Klein and Groot Constantia. And Berg at this stage was a very wealthy man, so he and Anna bought Groot Constantia and it became their home. So this meant that Anna, a child of a slave and an ex-slave herself, became the mistress of one of Cape Town's greatest residents. How amazing is that? Berg and Anna had 12 children. See, there was no TV and contraception in these days. The names of the children were Christina, Maria, Petrus, Apollinia, Africana. What's with his name? Carolucie Erland, Johanna Magdalene, Dorothea Francina, Martinez, Simon Petrus, I'm saying it like I was Afrikaans, Engela and Albertus. At the time of her death, she had all of these properties and she became the stammoeders of South African society, and many South Africans of all colors and creeds, and in particular the Berg family, which can trace their lineage back to her. Amazing. How amazing are these women? What I wanted to do was just talk about the lessons, as I did last time, about what could be learned here. So Catharina, she transformed her life from a banished slave to an integrated free woman. She embraced her pardoning and marriage to improve her status. So she used her second chance that she was given. She entered into one of the earliest documented interracial marriages in the Cape, and she used her baptism to gain access to social and legal privileges, which we just see time and time again. So this really just affirms diversity and interracial harmony as part of our nation's history, adapting when things get hard, using your second chances, and encouraging resilience even though you're at a systematic disadvantage. Then Angela, she rose from slavery to become a respected landowner. She and her daughter, she built a wealth and secured property for herself before her husband came along. She became the stammoeder for many South Africans. Her marriage strengthened her social position, and she balanced her Asian heritage and European colonial society. Again, this mixed heritage giving cultural strength, as we spoke. Anna de Kooning maintained her standing in society despite her husband being arrested. She really maintained her composure in public roles. Despite these challenges, became such an impactful figure. She rose from slavery to owning Groot Constantia. Her legacy is that there's a wine named after her, and she's linked her name to properties, artworks, and historical memory. The lasting contribution in culture from all three of these ladies, from being this root that many of these roots then spread out from, and these stories and their resilience again, and their ability to understand how to improve their situations within the confines of what was allowed at that stage, coming to the Cape as slaves. They really need to be celebrated, and their stories be celebrated as this foundational threads of the tapestry of South African history. I hope you've enjoyed that. I thoroughly enjoyed talking through it again. I was pulling my hair out trying to put the story together. I hope it was coherent and you've understood each woman's contribution to who we are and what we see around us today. So thank you for listening. Come back next week talking about slavery and the slaves that came into South Africa. And hopefully we can get some good learnings out of it. I'll try my hardest. But I just want to set the scene with, well, these were the people that were here, indigenous to South Africa, first episode. What happened when the Dutch came here? Who did they use? And who did they help them? And that's where Katoa and her uncle's story comes to pass. And then these were the first slaves brought in by the VOC. Before we go into the 19th century, we'll talk about the impact of slavery onto the colored community and culture, because you can already see that from these ladies. Okay, and thank you for listening. Come back next week. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like this video, follow us on wherever we are on our socials, and I'll see you next week.